Well, good morning, Dave. Good morning,
G'day.
everybody. Welcome back to Theology Thursday. Bit of an interesting date today. You were just telling me
Yeah.
that today I'm thinking, what could we possibly be, marking as an event? Or
Well, this week's actually the first of 3 weeks in which the Jewish people mourn the breaching of the walls
Oh.
of Jerusalem. You've been talking about Ezra and Nehemiah and so
Yeah.
forth. In 587 BC, Nebuchadnezzar's army
Yep.
lay siege to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And a year later, on the 17th of Tammuz, that's the month,
they broke through.
they broke through, they breached the walls of Jerusalem, and
Right.
then they destroyed the temple and took Israel into captivity, as we know.
Right.
Then the Roman army, led by Titus,
Oh, so
laid-
this is fast forward.
Yeah,
a lot. Yeah, another 600 whatever years, right?
into 70 AD, we're talking about now. The Roman army, led by Titus, laid siege to Jerusalem on the 17th of Tammuz, the same date, and that's one of the big things
What?
for Jews.
There's
yeah.
like 600 and
Yeah.
whatever, 50 years, something between them,
Yeah.
and you're saying that both sieges started on the same day. Far out.
And it took them another 3 weeks. On the 9th of the following month, the month of Av, in 70 AD, the Romans
Wow.
then broke and destroyed the temple, which we'll touch on.
So clearly, military technology got better. It took a whole year for Nebuchadnezzar's army to breach the walls, and it only took 3 weeks for the Romans.
Ultimately, yeah.
Oh, okay, wow.
So that's 657 years apart, but on the same day. So that's why the Jews particularly note it. Around about 1000 BC, David and Solomon had built the walls around the city of Jerusalem. Probably, to be more correct, they actually extended the original
Yeah.
walls that the
That's
Jebusites
right.
had
Because there was already a town there, and
Yep.
they've made it into a city. Yeah.
So, and they were the walls that the Babylonians knocked down.
Right, right.
And they were built back again by Ezra and Nehemiah.
Right.
Only to be destroyed again, as we said, by Rome
Yeah.
in 70 AD. The current walls that surround the city of Jerusalem,
Yeah, like how long have they been there?
they were actually put up during the Ottoman Empire. So around about 1535, they built the outside walls, not the temple,
Okay.
just the walls around the city.
Right, wow.
So in Israel, these 3 weeks are a time of mourning.
And sorry, when you say 1530, that's AD. That's,
AD, yeah.
So about 500 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
In the Ottoman Empire. So these 3 weeks are a time of mourning that culminates in the anniversary of the destruction of the temple, with the army led by Titus, who was the prince of Rome, and that's important.
Yeah.
He was the prince.
Yeah, wow.
Israel began their revolt against Rome's authority in 66 AD. There'd been all sorts of stuff that had fermented before that, the Maccabees and so forth.
Yeah, and anyone who's seen the life of Brian knows that there were rebels. There were Jews that were rebelling against the Romans.
Always.
What have the Romans ever done
Yeah.
for us?
The revolution, or the war, as they call it, the War of the Jews, lasted until Titus, with his Roman legions, arrived, as we said, in 70 AD. So there was this four a bit year war that was going on. The Roman army built embankments. This is with Titus. Put battering rams into place, and the siege began and culminated in the walls being broken. And then there were 3 weeks of pillaging and destruction, which ended in the temple being set on fire and its total destruction.
It was just incredibly, like Josephus was saying how it was absolutely terrible.
We'll
terrible.
talk about just how terrible in a few minutes. The Roman army had 30,000 troops, and the Jewish army had about 24,000. So, according to Roman historians Tacitus, there were over 500,000 Jews who were also visiting the area because it was Passover when the siege began.
Man.
You had people who'd run into the city for protection, plus those that had come to Passover.
I wonder
So
if that was
it packed.
intentional.
Probably.
If the Romans, waited for Passover because they knew there'd be more people there for them to attack. Who knows?
Well, the city ultimately was left desolate, except for the towers at the northwest end of the city, which was there to show that Rome's might had knocked down such a fierce protection. And these served just as a memorial
Yeah.
of that. Over 1 million Jews were killed. I think you were saying about.
Yeah, I read that it was 1.3 million.
Yep.
You know when Jesus says in Matthew 24, there will never be another day like it. I actually did a bit of homework, and it turns out there are 3 genocides in history that were worse. That was Mao Zedong. He's at the top of the pile by a long way, with 75 million people that were killed or died under his watch. But most of them, that was over a period of many years and a lot of starvation. Then you've got both Hitler and Stalin. They're tied at about 12 million. And again, that happened over a period of several years, and the war and starvation. But this one, the siege of Jerusalem is next with 1.3 million. So that's in terms of numbers, it's the 4th worst. However, it was over a much shorter period of time. So when Jesus said there will never be a day like this, it's actually quite literal.
Yep.
There's never been anything, so many people killed and executed in such a short period of time.
Well, as I said, over 1 million and 95,000 taken prisoner. According to Eusebius, the Christians saw the might of the Roman army and taking heed of the warning that Jesus had given his disciples in the Olivet Discourse,
Yes.
which we'll deal with in a minute, they fled, a lot of them to Pella. But Josephus reported that none of the Christians, and this is interesting, none of the Christians were killed or captured in this wipeout of Jerusalem, which is
It's astonishing because when they saw the Roman army approaching before the siege started, they all said, "Let's get out of here! You know, let's run."
It was the second. We'll deal with that one in a minute.
Okay.
That's quite fascinating.
Yeah, but it is astonishing that they all recognize this, and that's, I think, one of the keys here, Dave, is that the Christians at the time in Jerusalem recognized this is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24. This is what he was talking about. We've got to get out of here.
This generation, Jesus kept repeating that. Certainly this would have been the most dramatic event ever to have taken place in the lifetime of those who witnessed it. Such a momentous event that it might have seemed to them like the end of the world.
Yeah.
But some of those who escaped, these followers of the way, or Christians in other words, they took time to write down the words and actions of the things that Jesus did and his sufferings in what we know now as the 4 Gospels. And 3 of these authors, Matthew, Mark and Luke, recorded many of the things that Jesus had told them would take place while some of them were still alive, Matthew particularly. Yet, the events of 70 AD are never once mentioned in the Bible.
Not even in the book of Revelation,
No.
which is astonishing, since there are 2 theories on when Revelation was written, and one popular theory, and you'll find it in your study Bibles and in other material. Some theologians think that it was written in 95 AD. Well, if it was written in 95, surely they would mention the destruction of Jerusalem, which is a historically proven fact. I mean, it happened, we can still see the evidence of it today. So you'd think that John would make mention of it. But so the other theory is that no, Revelation was not written in 95 AD. It was actually written before 70 AD.
And that's got to be the logical conclusions. Somewhere between 50 and 68.
Yeah.
And I think that is quite important.
Well, certainly while Nero was emperor, because we have that reference to him in the book of Revelations.
So much of the end times teaching of so many Western evangelicals is built on the teaching of Jesus in Matthew 24. But historical Christian theology says that Jesus' teaching were actually about these events that we're talking about from 66 to 70 AD.
Because really, the significance of it is not that that it was the end of the world, but it was the end of the temple, the end of that Jewish age. You can't sacrifice anymore. So even though Jesus, as Christians, we think it all finished on the cross and the resurrection, but there was another 40 years of that where sacrificing still went on in the temple. So really, this was the date, 70 AD, 40 years after Jesus, that it actually culminated and finished. There is no more sacrifice at the temple. and never has been since.
No, that's true. We've talked a little about this before, but we want to look at these events specifically and compare it to Jesus' teaching in Matthew 24.
Okay.
Oliver. Jesus said,
Exciting.
"Not one stone of this temple will remain on another," as he answered the disciples' two questions.
Right.
When will it happen was
Yeah.
their question, and what is the sign at the end of the age? So Jesus answered the disciples' question and used the typically dramatic language of the Old Testament prophets, a language and style that they understood. That was familiar territory for them. Remember, it wasn't just any Jews he was talking to, but ones whom he had taught.
Yeah.
So they knew him. He was not addressing 21st century Western English speakers.
So wait a minute, it's not all about me. I thought he had me on his mind, you know, like, well,
We've got to get our heads into the right context
Yeah.
to understand what Jesus was saying. And in Matthew 24, Jesus uses the phrase, the end of the age.
right.
He
And that's
does
an
this-
important
yeah.
that's an important phrase.
The Greek word for age is aeon, not cosmos, which would be the end
Right.
of the world. So Hebrews 9:26 says, Jesus appeared at the end of the age to put away sin. Now, we're not waiting for him to do that until some future
Yeah.
date. We know that happened at the end of that age.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, speaking of the end that we would call an era, and surely the life, death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus saw the end of one age and the beginning of another.
100%.
So a little background here.
Okay, let's go.
All right. By 68, Nero had been the emperor of Rome for 14 years, but he was a very unstable man.
Oh yes.
His predecessor, Claudius, was not much better, but the predecessor to Claudius was Caligula. Who
We've all heard of him. He's one of the famous ones.
we'd regard him as insane by today's
Yeah.
standards. And with such instability at the top, the Roman Empire began to fracture.
Yeah.
There was all sorts of things happening in the Roman Empire.
And Nero himself was mad as a cut snake.
Oh.
You know, he like they still to this historians think that it was him that set Rome on fire.
Yeah.
You know, he blamed the Christians, like blame them, the little guys. You know, but really, you know, it's pretty established that most people think, yeah, it was Nero. He's crazy.
Yeah. Some of the Jewish zealots saw this instability as a time to revolt
Right.
against Rome. And they'd been fomenting unrest in the Jewish territories for quite a while.
Hence the war, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And this was all exasperated by a series of corrupt Roman governors as well. Festus, before whom Paul appeared, he was quite reasonable, but his predecessor Felix was renowned for his corruption. But after Festus, so we go Felix, Festus, and then came Florus, Gaius Florian, or Gessius Florus, who was absolutely evil. He stole from the temple treasury and he plundered the temple treasures. And to show his power and keep people in subservience, he just gratuitously murdered random Jewish people. And it said that he murdered more than 3,500 innocent people for no reason at all, just because he thought it'd be a good thing to do today.
Just flexing.
So this
evil.
added fuel to the fire for the zealots, who were already committed to a violent revolution against Rome. And so by 66 AD, they had enough of a following to start an uprising.
Yeah.
So the governor of Syria, Cestus Gallus, was directed eventually to go to Judea and put down the rebellion. And he arrived with his army and he laid siege to Jerusalem. Now this is
Right.
really...
What year was that?
This is really important. Around 67, I think.
So this is a few years before the Roman siege, the proper.
Not long before, but yeah.
But
yeah.
so well, he's Roman, but he's come down and done a pre-siege siege.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really quite amazing. He quickly had the city locked up tight, and it looked like he was going to starve them out and win an easy victory. Now, in fact, what he didn't know was that Jerusalem had been set up for sieges, and so they had enough food and so forth for about 2 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, he was just going to starve them out as he thought it, an easy victory. But then something really strange happened, and it remains today to be an historical mystery. Nobody, it's like remember Hitler, he called halt to the army's advance down onto the beach and allowed 300,000 troops to go.
On Normandy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is...
And nobody knows why.
Nobody knows why he did it.
Right. It's similar
yeah.
thing.
And this is the same thing. It's a mystery. 6 days into the siege, he orders the army to end the siege, and he, and together with the rest of his army, they go back to Syria. Weird. Now, the Jewish zealot forces pursued them, and then at the Battle of Beth Haram, they defeated the Romans, and they left several thousand Roman soldiers dead in their wake.
Go the zealots.
Yeah, and most of Jerusalem thought that God had allowed the Jewish people to gain their independence from Rome. But the Christian people who were living in Jerusalem at that time remembered something. Jesus had said a few things in the Olivet Discourse that rang a bell. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, flee to the hills. Now, that's a weird thing to say, because when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies, how are you going to get out in order to flee to the hills?
Did he say armies or did he say eagles?
Well,
because the eagles are the standard of the Roman army. Now, here's something that's interesting too. In my version, in the version of the Bible that I read, which is the New International Version, they've translated that word as vultures, because they're all assuming, they're the birds that pick on the dead bodies. But actually, it's not vultures. If you look up the Greek, it's eagles, and he's referring to the standards of the Roman armies. When you see that surrounding Jerusalem, these eagles on these standards,
that's absolutely right.
Time to go.
So how do you go? For some inexplicable reasons, the Romans left.
Brilliant.
And the Christians in Jerusalem said, we're out of here.
The door's open, run.
And they quickly taking seriously Jesus' command.
Yeah.
So they understood what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24. So
it's important to we're sort of labouring that point for the second time, because of course so many Christians teach, and so many preachers teach, that Jesus was referring to something that's in the future for us, in the year 2000 and something, that it's in the future, whereas these people recognize, no, this is 70 AD, this siege, the Romans surrounding us, this is the eagles surrounding Jerusalem. This is what Jesus is talking about in Matthew 24. It's not actually 2,000 years in the future, it's right now.
This generation.
Yeah.
That's why I kept saying. Nero, naturally enough, he wanted revenge for his soldiers' defeat. So he sent a general named Vespasian with 60,000 soldiers to avenge his army. And he began in Galilee, and he systematically worked his way towards Jerusalem. Yeah. And each little village on the way was crushed. People were just brought out and killed in the streets. It was a bloodbath. And the descriptions that we have from Josephus are absolutely horrific. He talks about the Sea of Galilee being filled with bloated bodies and blood in the streets of these villages flowing down the Jordan River. Very similar language to what we read in the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
Many of the Jews headed to Jerusalem. This is not the Christian ones, but many ran into Jerusalem from these towns when Vespasian came through.
So if you're not familiar with the geography, Galilee is up in the north, and they were coming. So they'd marched from Rome, so they've had to come down from the north,
so they're
coming. So Jerusalem's down the bottom, so they've all run down to Jerusalem
because they reckon that's going to be a place of safety because.
Well, it was an impressive city, and the walls were impressive.
And not only that, you had all these people coming to Jerusalem because it was Passover.
Right.
So you've got these two events culminating.
Not to mention there's 2 years worth of food there.
Yes.
So, worst case scenario, if we do get sieged in, we're good for a couple of years.
So Jesus spoke of wars and rumours of wars. And it was at this time that civil war broke out in Rome. And whenever some little bit of peace was created, there was another rumour of a war, and that circulated another internal war that was fought.
Because, who wouldn't? Nero was, like I said, mad as a cut snake, so he was not leading well.
And he knew his time was up. He went out and committed suicide.
There you go. But interesting you said, the language in the book of Revelation, the blood shall flow to the horse's
Yeah.
mane.
Yep.
And again, people think, oh, that's a futuristic Armageddon, but really he's referring to this period of time and the Jews that the book of Revelation was written to originally.
Yep.
They all acknowledged it. They all recognized, oh, this is happening. People are being murdered and killed at a huge rate. And
Jesus spoke of stars falling from the sky.
right.
Now, we kind of look up and we see all these stars and think, oh, it hasn't happened yet. But that was an expression that was used in those days related to the fall of a leader. Your star has fallen. That means that your leader's dead. It related to those rulers or leaders. And in the civil war that was fought in Rome, 4 emperors rose, and each one in his turn was murdered. So the stars fell
Yeah.
from heaven.
The year of the 4 seasons.
The year
right.
of the 4 seasons. It was Vespasian who eventually restored order, and he became
So
the
hold
emperor.
on, Dave. So when the book of Revelation talks about, the beast with the 10 heads, which we understand as the Roman Empire with 10 Caesars, and it says, then 2 of the horns, and the 10 heads have 10 horns, and the horns here, and the 7 horns, and the 2 horns, and these are the ones that you're talking about, like that died quickly, and then 2 others rose up. They're actually Caesars.
Yep.
Continue.
Mentioned right there. So Vespasian restored order, and he became the emperor, and actually ruled for 10 years.
Right.
And then his son Titus ruled for another 10 years after that.
Because wasn't Titus the general?
Yeah, he's the son of Vespasian.
So Vespasian came down as the first general. He
then-
took over as Caesar. So his
As
son,
son.
Titus,
The prince which is to come.
right. So he would have been a young guy.
Yeah.
He would have probably been in his early to mid 20s. You would
In
think,
all probability.
as the general
Yeah.
of the army. Wow.
Because he was the son of the emperor. So,
Yeah.
He hadn't forgotten Jerusalem, and the Jews, so he sent Titus to finish the job that he had started, basically. And so that leads up to the siege of Jerusalem and its sacking that we talked about, and that was put in motion. Jerusalem had great provision to withstand a siege, as we've said. They had food there to last for a couple of years. But Jerusalem fell to Titus within a few months. Why was this? Well, the book of Revelation makes prominent mention of a 5-month period, and presumably this is the 5 months it's talking about. And the reason the siege didn't last longer was because the zealot leaders, they wanted to provoke violent response. And so to force the issue, they burn all the food in Jerusalem, and they created overnight a sudden crisis. People were suddenly without food. And people in artificial famine that's created by a siege, when they're in that situation, things get ugly and very nasty. And that's exactly what happened in Jerusalem. People murdering for a small piece of food. Josephus tells us a lot about this. Cannibalism.
Yeah, I heard Josephus mentions cannibalism.
It almost defies description. You were talking about blood flowing up to the manes of a horse. Josephus actually wrote about there was so much blood flowing in Jerusalem that it was extinguishing fires. That's Josephus, not our reading of Revelation. That's Josephus' words. Titus saw this as a huge opportunity for plunder. So he and his soldiers go through the city, looting, burning, stealing, raping, pillaging, everything that you can imagine. The temple, that was a victim. It was set on fire and it was absolutely destroyed.
I read in that book by Jonathan Welton, highly recommended, by the way. It's called Raptureless by Jonathan Welton. It chronicles and goes into great detail on all of this. I understood that I think it was Titus that had seen the temple, and it was very magnificent, and he actually ordered that it would be spared, and said, look, actually don't destroy that. However, one of his soldiers in bloodlust and in the moment threw a flaming spear, and his mate thought, oh, I'll throw mine too, and then next minute everybody's throwing it, and the temple was burned to the ground.
Just as Jesus said pretty graphically in the Olivet Discourse, not one stone was left on another.
Yeah.
will all be laid to waste. Jesus said, look, your houses are left you desolate. So interestingly, the Roman historian, now we're not talking about Christians here. Okay?
No.
The Roman historian Tacitus wrote that Titus felt that this catastrophe that happened to Jerusalem was so horrific that it must have represented the judgment of the Jewish God against his
Wow.
people. That's the way he viewed it.
Wow.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, I think he nailed it. Because that's I think what again a lot of Christians we don't acknowledge or don't understand that when there's the second coming of Jesus, which hasn't happened yet, but the great and awful day of judgment, that's not the great white throne judgment. That's the judgment against the Jewish
Very much.
age, the Jewish culture. So this is where that guy and others have acknowledged that was the end of the Jewish age. That was the great judgment day against them.
So AD 70 is really important, and we need to truly understand AD 70 and all that happened. And if you do, you'll see that it was all as Jesus had told his disciples in the Olivet Discourse. There on the Mount of Olives, just after they'd crossed the road, so to speak, from the temple, and Jesus had made his statement about one stone not being left on top of another, and they were asking questions like, when's that going to happen?
Yeah.
And Jesus began to tell them, and he gave such detail that when you look at AD 70, you cannot help but see the detail that Jesus had given. So rather than commenting on sometime in the future, it was something that was going to happen in their generation. They would see it.
Yeah. Do you know, Dave, we were talking about this just, before we started filming this morning, but there are some people, this is news to a lot of people in Western churches and, especially contemporary churches. We didn't learn a lot about this or anything like this in Bible college. Now this sort of information and this history is becoming more mainstream, and people are starting to acknowledge, oh, wow, okay, 70 AD was the real thing. And some people have suggested, well, maybe we're both right. Maybe, yes, it was 70 AD, but there'll also be a second fulfillment. And, Dave and I talked about this. Neither of us think that's the case, actually. We think it's highly unlikely that such specific fulfillment of prophecy, it's not generalized, it's very specific, as you've seen, is highly unlikely that it would ever happen again. But I guess that remains to be seen, and it's not a deal breaker. It's okay if you believe that, and I guess we'll see, as I said. But in the meantime, you can have confidence that Jesus is on the throne, he is in control, that his kingdom, of the increase of his government, of his kingdom, there will be no end. So you can have confidence that God is still in control, and that there are
Jesus
good days ahead.
knows what's happening in the future as well, as we can see from that.
So have a great week, and look forward to next Theology Thursday, and what subject Dave throws up for that one. So God bless you, and we'll see you on Sunday.